300 hours local time. Tehran is shrouded in darkness, but the pastor's palace is alive with panic. This isn't a drill. It is a full-scale emergency evacuation. Elite IRGC units are scrambling, feverishly securing a perimeter around a convoy of blacked-out armored SUVs. Their cargo? Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. As the unsuspecting city sleeps, the regime's highest authority is being rushed out of the capital, fleeing toward a hardened command and control bunker buried hundreds of feet beneath the Zagros Mountains. But why now? Why does a leader who projects absolute power suddenly run for the hills? The answer lies not in Tehran, but in Moscow. The Russian S-400 air defense batteries, explicitly tasked with protecting Iranian airspace, have gone silent. The radar screens are black. The betrayal is absolute. For the first time in decades, the Ayatollah is exposed, and the skies above him are wide open to Western strikes. The alliance hasn't just cracked, it has been decapitated. And as the convoy disappears into the dark, one thing is terrifyingly clear. The checkmate has already begun. To understand this sudden collapse in command confidence, we must rewind the tape to the handshake that started it all. For over 2 years, Tehran has served as Moscow's primary logistical artery. The IRGC didn't just support Putin's war in Ukraine, they fueled it. They flooded the Russian front lines with thousands of Shahed 136 kamikaze drones, allowing the Kremlin to batter Kyiv's energy infrastructure while preserving their own dwindling missile stocks. They emptied their warehouses of artillery shells and even began transferring short-range ballistic missiles. But this wasn't charity. It was a transaction, a blood pact. The terms of the deal were explicit: Iranian hardware for Russian protection. Specifically, Tehran demanded the S-400 Triumph air defense systems and the Su-35 Flanker-E air superiority fighters. In the mind of Ali Khamenei, this was the ultimate insurance policy. He was trading expendable loitering munitions for a top-tier, impenetrable shield that would make an Israeli or American strike virtually suicidal. However, the bill has come due, and the account is empty. The reality on the ground reveals a catastrophic failure of the drone for security framework. The Russian-made air defense batteries, explicitly tasked with guarding critical Iranian nuclear sites and command centers, have proven to be nothing more than expensive lawn ornaments. When the threat indicators flashed red, the Russian radar screens didn't just fail to track, they failed to exist. It is a technological betrayal that signals one of two things. Either Russian military hardware is functionally obsolete against modern Western electronic warfare, or worse, Moscow deliberately pulled the plug. Consider the Su-35 fiasco. Dozens of these advanced 4.5 generation fighters were promised to modernize Iran's aging Rust Bucket Air Force. Pilots were trained, payments were cleared, yet the hangars in Isfahan remained barren. Moscow took the drones, utilized the leverage, and then ghosted their ally. Intelligence reports now suggest a humiliating truth. Russia is so desperate for hardware in its own war of attrition that they have likely cannibalized the export models intended for Iran, stripping them for parts to keep their own battered fleet flying over the Donbass. But therein lies the strategic nightmare for the supreme leader. He bet the survival of his regime on a partner who is militarily bankrupt. The Kremlin is burning through equipment faster than it can produce it, and honoring a defense pact with Tehran is no longer a priority when losing the Black Sea is a genuine possibility. This leaves the Islamic Republic in a terrifying geopolitical position. They believed they had bought a nuclear umbrella-grade conventional shield. Instead, they purchased a paper tiger. The strategic calculus has shifted overnight. Without the Russian S-400 umbrella, the entire Iranian airspace is porous. The axis of resistance turns out to be a one-way street where Iran gives blood and treasure and receives silence in return. And as Khamenei races toward the Zagros Mountains, the realization is hitting him harder than any missile could. He is completely, utterly alone. To understand the absolute magnitude of this betrayal, we must first dissect the anatomy of the strike itself. This was not merely a failure of personnel or a lapse in vigilance. It was a systemic, catastrophic collapse of the Russian-supplied Integrated Air Defense System, IADS, that Tehran paid billions to construct. The cornerstone of this defense was the S-300 PMU-2 Favorite, a system Moscow marketed as the ultimate area denial weapon, capable of tracking 100 targets simultaneously and engaging the most advanced threats at ranges exceeding 120 miles. In the glossy brochures handed to IRGC generals, the S-300 is a fortress. In the harsh light of the Isfahan dawn, it was a sitting duck. The specific failure occurred at the radar level. Satellite imagery confirms that the 30N6E2 Tombstone engagement radar, the brain of the battery protecting the Natanz nuclear facility, was surgically obliterated. This is the single most critical component of the system. Without the Tombstone, the missile launchers are nothing more than oversized trucks carrying inert telephone poles. They cannot see, they cannot lock, and they cannot fire. But the terrifying reality for Iran is not that the radar was hit, it's how it was hit. The Israelis utilized an air-launched ballistic missile, likely a variant of the Rampage or the Rocks, fired from outside the S-300's detection envelope. The Russian system was designed to intercept exactly this kind of threat. It failed to detect the launch, failed to track the approach, and failed to deploy a countermeasure. This brings us to the operational nightmare of the F-35I Adir. The disparity between the F-35I and the Russian-made air defense network is not a gap, it is a canyon. While the IRGC was relying on Russian specifications from the late 1990s, the Israeli Air Force was operating in a different dimension of warfare. The Adir is not just a stealth fighter, it is an airborne electronic warfare node. As these jets approached Iranian airspace, they didn't just hide from radar, they actively assaulted it with terabytes of jamming data. The S-300's sensors were likely flooded with ghost targets, electronic hallucinations that forced the system's algorithms to freeze or reboot. By the time the Russian-made processors could filter the noise from the reality, the kinetic warheads had already impacted. However, the technical obsolescence of the S-300 is only half the story. The true betrayal lies in the data. Modern air defense does not operate in a vacuum. It relies on a kill chain that starts thousands of miles away. For an S-300 in Isfahan to successfully intercept an F-35 or a high-speed ballistic missile, it needs early warning data. It needs a cue. This is where Russia's role, or lack thereof, becomes criminally negligent in the eyes of Tehran. Russia maintains a sophisticated surveillance network in Syria, centered around the Khmeimim Air Base and the Tartus Naval Facility. They have powerful S-400 radars and A-50 AWACS aircraft monitoring the eastern Mediterranean and the skies over Iraq. Moscow saw the strike coming. There is zero doubt among intelligence analysts that Russian radar operators in Syria tracked the Israeli formation as it refueled and crossed into Iraqi airspace. They saw the energy spikes. They registered the flight vectors. Under the strategic partnership signed between Putin and Khamenei, there is an implicit protocol for data sharing during imminent threats. A simple encoded transmission from Khmeimim to Tehran could have given the Iranian air defense crews 5 to 10 minutes of warning. In the world of ballistic missile defense, 5 minutes is an eternity. It is the difference between a crew that is asleep and a crew that is battle-ready with radars hot. Yet, the red phone in Tehran remained silent. Why? Because Vladimir Putin is playing a double game. While he needs Iranian drones to pummel Ukrainian cities, he also needs Israeli neutrality to prevent Jerusalem from sending Iron Dome batteries or Merkava tanks to Kyiv. By allowing Israel to humiliate Iran, Putin maintains a delicate balance, sacrificing his allies' security to preserve his own tactical flexibility. He let the strike happen. He allowed the S-300s, his own flagship export product, to be exposed as fraudulent, risking future arms sales, just to keep Netanyahu from pivoting fully toward Ukraine. It is a level of Machiavellian calculation that leaves Khamenei exposed to the bone. Furthermore, we must address the monkey model theory. For decades, Soviet and subsequently Russian arms manufacturers have practiced the doctrine of export degradation. The equipment sold to foreign client states, Syria, Iraq, and now Iran, is rarely identical to the hardware used by the Russian armed forces. The S-300s sitting in Isfahan likely lack the specific frequency hopping algorithms and ECCM, electronic countermeasures, found in the domestic versions guarding Moscow. They are shelled versions, stripped of the sensitive source code that allows for true integration. Iran bought the brand name, but they didn't get the proprietary technology. They are fighting a 2024 war with hardware that has been electronically lobotomized. The implications of this technical failure are staggering. The destruction of the Isfahan radar site was a dead operation, destruction of enemy air defenses. But it was also a message. Israel used a fraction of its firepower to blind the single most heavily defended point in the Islamic Republic. If a handful of jets could blind the S-300 guarding the nuclear program, what happens when the full weight of the Israeli Air Force arrives? Right now, the Iranian command and control structure is fracturing. The commanders on the ground are looking at their Russian screens and realizing they cannot trust what they see. A loss of faith in equipment leads rapidly to a collapse in morale. If you know your shield is made of paper, you do not stand and fight, you run. This is why we are seeing reports of the supreme leader moving to secure bunkers. He knows the sky is open. He knows that the Russian guarantee was a lie. But the technical betrayal goes even deeper than the S-300. It extends to the skies themselves. The Iranian Air Force is currently a museum of aviation, relying on F-14 Tomcats from the 1970s and MiG-29s that have barely been serviced. The Su-35 Flanker E deal was supposed to fix this. These are 4.5 generation super maneuverable fighters that could, in theory, challenge Western aircraft. Iran paid for them. Iranian pilots went to Russia to train on them. But where are they? They are nowhere. Intelligence indicates that the Su-35s earmarked for Iran have been diverted. Some are being kept in reserve for the Russian aerospace forces as they hemorrhage aircraft over the Donbass. Others are simply being withheld as leverage. Russia is effectively holding the Iranian Air Force hostage, dangling the keys to modernization while refusing to hand them over. They have taken the cash, taken the drones, and left Iran with an air force that would be obliterated in the first hour of a high-intensity conflict. This creates a vacuum of power that is being rapidly filled by fear. The IRGC's entire defensive doctrine was based on asymmetric deterrence, the idea that they could punish any attacker with missile swarms while hiding behind a Russian-made shield. Now, the shield is gone. The S-300 is proven ineffective against standoff munitions. The Russian early warning network is silent. The Su-35s are phantoms, and the West knows it. The strategic ambiguity that once protected Tehran has evaporated. NATO planners, CENTCOM analysts, and Israeli generals now have hard data points. They know the exact engagement envelope of the Iranian defenses. They know the reaction times. They know that Russia will not intervene. The axis of resistance has been revealed to be functionally hollow. It is an alliance of convenience where Russia extracts resources and provides nothing but empty promises. For the supreme leader, this is the worst-case scenario. He has depleted his own stockpiles to feed Russia's war, leaving his own country vulnerable just as his enemies have unlocked the code to his defenses. The silence from the Russian radar stations in Syria was the loudest sound Khamenei has ever heard. It was the sound of a superpower closing the door. So, what happens when a regime realizes it is defenseless? History tells us they do not de-escalate. They panic. They lash out. Deprived of a conventional shield, the logic of survival dictates that they must accelerate their sprint toward the ultimate deterrent. If Russian conventional weapons cannot protect the regime, then only a nuclear device can. The failure of the S-300 doesn't just mean the skies are open. It means the timeline for a nuclear breakout has likely shifted from years to months. However, there is a catch. To build a bomb, you need time. And time is exactly what the F-35I Adir just stole from them. With the radar blinded, Israel has established air supremacy without officially declaring war. They can now loiter, they can watch, they can strike at will. The Russian betrayal has stripped Iran of the ability to control the tempo of the conflict. They are no longer players on the board, they are spectators to their own dismantling. And as the dust settles over the radar site in Isfahan, a new reality sets in. The specialized engagement radars, the 96L6E high-altitude detectors, all of them are suspect. Are they working? Or are they just transmitting their coordinates to the enemy? The trust is gone. And in modern warfare, once you lose trust in your sensors, you have already lost the war. The Supreme Leader isn't running because of a single missile strike. He is running because he just realized that for the last 2 years, he has been buying protection from a mafia don who is broke, desperate, and selling him out to the cops. Deep within the hardened concrete arteries of the Qatam al-Anbiya Air Defense Headquarters, the mood has shifted from calculated defiance to absolute disarray. Reports indicate that the Supreme Leader has initiated continuity of government protocols, a sterile military term for running for your life. Armored convoys are scrambling out of Tehran, utilizing decoy routes and jamming signals, behavior consistent with a regime expecting a decapitation strike within the hour. But where do you run when the airspace above you is no longer yours? The psychological impact of the Russian betrayal has triggered a chain reaction inside the IRGC's command structure. For decades, Iranian doctrine relied on the assumption that Moscow provided an intelligence backstop. They believed that even if their own sensors failed, Russian satellites and long-range radars in Syria would provide a heads-up. That data link is now dead. The red phones connecting Tehran to the Russian general staff are ringing in an empty room. The silence is not just a diplomatic snub, it is an operational catastrophe. Consequently, the Integrated Air Defense System, IADS, is fragmenting. Without the unifying data picture provided by Russian tech, individual battery commanders are going rogue. Terrified of anti-radiation missiles that home in on active radar signals, local operators are reportedly keeping their systems cold. They are choosing blindness over death. This creates massive gaps in the defensive net, effectively rolling out a red carpet for hostile aircraft. The centralized command has lost the ability to enforce fire discipline, meaning the few units that do turn on their radars are lighting themselves up as isolated targets, easily picked off one by one. Worse yet, this external failure is fueling an internal purge. The IRGC's counterintelligence units are tearing through the ranks, operating on the paranoid suspicion that the failure of the S-300s wasn't just Russian incompetence, but insider sabotage. Officers responsible for procurement and maintenance are being pulled from their posts for, quote, enhanced interrogation. The chain of command is being decapitated from the inside out, not by Israeli missiles, but by the regime's own fear. A commander afraid of being branded a traitor is a commander who freezes. And in the hyperspeed environment of modern aerial warfare, hesitation is a death sentence. The chaos is absolute. Secure communication lines are flooded with conflicting orders. Some units are being ordered to mobilize to the border, while others are told to dig in around the nuclear sites. There is no cohesion. The axis of resistance has devolved into a scramble for survival. The Supreme Leader is looking at his generals and seeing potential defectors. The generals are looking at their Russian equipment and seeing expensive scrap metal. The illusion of safety provided by the Kremlin has been shattered, and in its place, the cold reality of isolation is setting in. They are alone in the dark, and they know the wolves are circling. But look beyond the panic in Tehran's bunkers, and you see a geopolitical tectonic shift. The so-called axis of resistance hasn't just cracked, it has been exposed as a fraud. For years, the Ayatollahs operated under the assumption that they were an indispensable node in the Eurasian alliance against the West. They believed that an attack on Tehran would trigger a global crisis that neither Moscow nor Beijing could afford. They were wrong. Beijing's calculus is cold and arithmetic. China imports roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports. Yet, as Israeli jets pierced Iranian airspace, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs offered nothing but generic calls for restraint. There were no emergency airlifts of HQ-9 air defense batteries, no naval maneuvers in the Persian Gulf to screen the IRGC. Beijing has made a strategic choice. Cheap oil is replaceable, but a direct conflict with the United States Navy is not. Iran has been demoted from a strategic partner to a disposable gas station. Russia's betrayal runs even deeper. By allowing their vaunted S-300 and S-400 systems to sit idle, or worse, by providing the deactivation codes to the West as part of a backroom deal in Ukraine, Putin has sent a clear message. Alliances in the authoritarian world are purely transactional. When the heat gets too high, the Kremlin doesn't back up its friends. It cuts them loose to save its own skin. This leaves the supreme leader in a terrifying geopolitical vacuum. The Look East strategy has collapsed. Iran is now a geopolitical orphan, stripped of great power protection. The deterrence equation has fundamentally flipped. Without the threat of Russian intervention or Chinese economic retaliation, the threshold for a regime change operation drops to near zero. Washington and Tel Aviv now know they can strike the head of the snake without starting World War III. The shield is gone. The bluff has been called. And for the first time since 1979, the regime isn't fighting a proxy war. It is staring down the barrel of a kinetic war it cannot win alone. This is the endgame. The flight from Tehran isn't just a tactical relocation. It is the final symptom of a regime in a terminal death spiral. History is littered with authoritarian strongmen who believed their bunkers were impregnable right until the moment the air raid sirens stopped and the silence set in. Khamenei knows this history. He remembers the spider hole of Saddam. He remembers the fate of Gaddafi. With the Russian air defense umbrella folded and Beijing looking the other way, the supreme leader is no longer a player on the grand chessboard. He is merely a target in the crosshairs. The West has been handed a golden ticket, a fleeting window of opportunity where the geopolitical cost of a decapitation strike is lower than ever before. But therein lies the ultimate danger. When a cornered regime realizes it has absolutely nothing left to lose, does it surrender? Or does it try to incinerate the region on its way out? The nuclear centrifuges are spinning, the red button is live, and the clock is ticking.